Welcome, everyone. This is TK Kuegler. I am the managing partner and founder of Wasabi Venture Stables, and it's very exciting that we get to do these webinars. It's wonderful to have sort of the turnout that we get. We have, I think we have almost 50 people signed up to join tonight, which is wonderful to get this kind of crowd out from all over the country. And I attribute some of it to people are just tired of being at home. So if they get to call in and listen to me every once in a while, that's a good thing, I suppose. So tonight, we're continuing our series that we do, that we've been doing. Last week, or maybe the week before, we had a session on taking yearlings and getting them to be ready to go to the racetrack. So it makes perfect sense that we do the next step in our progression here, and we're going to take, what does it take to take those horses and get them ready for a race and a long racing career. And at Wasabi, what we have tried and continue to work at every day, including a conference call today about this, is how can we work as a team with the various people on our teams to make that happen and make that be successful. So, so we're doing, you got to know Zoe Valvo the last time, and today you're getting to meet Jesse Cruz. Jesse has been a trainer with us for about 2 years, I think, right, Jess? I think it's been 2 years now.
Yeah, we claimed our, I think our first horse 2 years ago, Glam Slam. We claimed our first horse together about March or April of 2 years ago. Yeah. So.
Yep, that's correct. So Jesse has been a trainer with us for the last 2 years, primarily in the Mid-Atlantic area, but he also did a string with us. He went out to Oaklawn last year, and we had a string at Oaklawn with Jesse, but he stayed in the Mid-Atlantic this year. And he currently has one of our new 2-year-olds with him right now, who came from Zoe, and he was actually at the Middleburg Training Center with the 2-year-olds today. And so at some point I'll work that into the talk, and some of those are going to be shipping into him maybe this week, if not next week. So so this is obviously fresh in our minds and a great part of the story. So with all of that preamble out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and start with Jesse. Why don't you take a couple minutes and give us your horse racing and training sort of background and how you got into the game and what you've done to this point.
Okay. So basically I grew up in the industry. My mom is and has been an assistant trainer for James Casey, at Charlestown my entire life. My stepfather, Lewis Craig Jr. is a trainer, and then at Charlestown as well. And then my real dad is actually a jockey. So growing up, my mom, was a single parent from early part of my life. So me and my sister spent a ton of time at the barn with her, and, kind of learned the foundations of horses and everything from my mom. And then from my stepfather, Lewis Craig Jr., I started really working at the track the first summer when I was 14 as a hot walker. Around that time, you start wanting to go to movies and do some things, and I needed money, so I went to actual work there. And at the same time, I started learning to gallop horses on the farm, and learning to really gallop from Jamie Johnson and Sherlyn Stevens, husband and wife. I helped Jamie break babies and stuff like that on his farm, and learned to really ride out there. And then through high school, I galloped every morning before I went to school. My junior year, I'd get on 2 horses every day and then go to school. And then my senior year, I went in late. My whole goal was to be a jockey. Freshman and sophomore year, I was probably 115, 120 pounds. And then as a junior and senior, I grew. So my mom wouldn't let me ride until I graduated. She knew I probably would have wanted to drop out of school to be a jockey, and she wasn't going to have that. So by the time I was a senior, I kind of had grown too much and really struggled trying to keep my weight down to be a jockey. And I decided that I didn't want to go to college, but I couldn't be a jockey. So I when everybody went to college, I packed up and went to Gulfstream to Miami and spent the winter there, galloping for an older trainer named Cam Gambelotti. He trained Spin the Buck, won the Kentucky Derby. I'm not for sure what year, but a few years back. You can look it up. And then I came home, went to work for another guy that's been like a mentor and a second dad for me, is Ollie Figgins III. I went to work for him, and Ollie really is the person that taught me how to train a string of horses, like a barn of 30, and make it a uniformed operation, and how to handle different mini clients and things like that. And I ended up working for Ollie, and as his assistant at the time, he had danced to Bristol, and Bristol really made me understand racing in general. She was a multiple graded stakes winner. We ran at the Breeders' Cup with her. We won 2 graded stakes in Saratoga with her, and I got to gallop her and go with her all across the country. After Bristol retired, I spent a summer working for Bill Mott in New York at Saratoga, who's obviously in the Hall of Fame. The next summer, I worked for Mike Maker and Joe Sharp. With them was the first time I got to really work for true claiming trainers and learn the claiming game, where all the other trainers that I had worked for, worked for breeders, and got to, you learn how to handle the 2-year-olds in that aspect, and how you get to have a new group of 2-year-olds come in every year. Where Joe and Mike are pretty much, they get some 2-year-olds, but their business is basically based off of claiming horses, and it's a little bit of a different aspect and a different way you have to play the game a little bit. So I got to learn both strings of that. I came home and kind of bounced around a little bit as a freelance or exercise rider and galloping for some people until I made up the decision to go ahead and take my trainer's test and go out on my own. And I took the test, I passed it. I had a horse sent to me by Javier Contreras, and my stepdad actually sent me a horse. Lewis Craig Jr. sent me a horse named Help a Brother. And so I had 2 horses, Help a Brother and then a horse named Maryland's Best. And I ran Maryland's Best, I think it was April 4th, 2017. I'm not for sure. It was my first start. And one of my really good friends, Lane Luzzy, was the jockey, and the horse won my first start as a trainer. So it was really nice, and things have just kind of progressed from there. We've got to meet a lot of good owners and things like that, and hooked up with TK. And our first claim together was a winner as well. So things have kind of went from there and grown, and that's kind of how I've gotten to this point a little bit. So, yeah.
Perfect. That was great, Jess. That was a perfect update. Just you mentioned Lane Luzzy in there, and Lane Luzzy, of course, broke our heart today as he ran.
I saw that.
he ran a horse that beat us by about a pole today. So, no, Lane actually rode our first winner as well way back when. And but Lane's a good friend of ours all the way around. So Jess, tonight we're going to talk about 2-year-olds, and talk to me a little bit about a 2-year-old that's going to come to you, and meaning, it's been designated to sort of come to you. When in the process do you start getting involved with it at Wasabi? When is the operation, knowing you're going to be the trainer at the end of it? When do you get involved, and how do you get involved in that process?
Well, for Wasabi, I with you guys, I've been, we've kind of went to the sales and things like that, and picked out some horses and stuff like that. And I think I've given some advice and things in that nature. But then they go to Zoe, and Zoe does her thing, and closing in on the last couple months or so is when Zoe and I kind of start talking and figuring out who's ready to come into the track, and who's really ready to do some more serious speed works, if that makes sense. Zoe kind of gets them ready, fit enough to breeze about in a quarter mile or so there in Middleburg, and then they come into us kind of really ready to do it in a much quicker fashion. So within the last month and a half or so is when I really start getting truly involved with it, and communicating with Zoe with that a little bit. So that's usually about when, you can kind of probably be, a part of it as early as needed to be, but that's usually how we've been doing it. So, yeah.
Yep. So when the horse first shows up to you at the racetrack, what's the first thing you're doing with that horse? The first day, what does it normally look like, and what is different from like what day 10 looks like, so to speak?
Okay, so first day is basically the whole object of first day is to get around there in one piece and let them see everything new. At the end of the day, they're broke, so they've had a rider ride them, they've been galloping, they've worked, but now you've taken a horse away from its friends at one place, so now it doesn't really kind of know anybody. It's in a new place. It doesn't know the people around it. So even though they're broke, they still are a little bit timid and don't want to trust you as much right away. So the first day is basically, let's get the saddle on them nicely. Let's get them out there and see what they know exactly and how they're going to handle being in a new place and a new routine. That's first day. And typically, Zoe does such a great job that typically first day has went with all the horses, knock on wood, has went very well. And they've all kind of come in and went around there in a good order, kind of looked at some new sites and some new things. Here at Pimlico, on a normal year, we'd have people in the infield building, the Preakness tents and things like that. So they usually take a look at that the first 2 days or so, and kind of see that as they go around. And basically the first day or so is just them getting settled in and getting settled into a new group of people and a new routine. So by day 10, they're usually settled into that, and we're on our way of making racehorses.
What would be something that would be a red flag for you on that first day? Is there anything where if something happens, you say, I thought we were going in direction A, but it's actually going to be direction B here. Are there any things that worry you that worry you?
So with us, we haven't had too many problems like that. Like I said, knock on wood. But I have worked in barns where, as an assistant, people have, owners have sent horses in and have told us, this horse is galloping, it's ready to breeze a quarter mile, it's kind of flopped out of the gate a little bit, and first day it's come in and couldn't get the saddle on it in the stall. So that's a little bit of a red flag right there. Like, okay, it was really difficult to tack up. We got on it. He kind of bucked down the shed row a little bit, like he hadn't had somebody on him in a while. Things like that are like red flags, are major red flags. But for the most part, another red flag would just be if, I took the horse out there and galloped him a mile and he's exhausted. Something's definitely wrong here, and we got to go back, restart over, because at the end of the day, at the track, it costs more money for that horse to be there than it does to be at the training center. So we try to get them legged up enough to where they're really ready to start doing some serious work. So things like that are what are red flags. If they can't go into really serious work by day 10, then we got to start figuring some things out here and figure out if we need to send them back to the farm and get a little bit further along than what they were. Hello?
Sorry, I put it on mute just so that I wouldn't have a lot of background noise. So, and then I'm not smart enough to take it off of mute. So, and you were doing such an eloquent job, and I figured I didn't even need to be here. So, anyway, so you mentioned too that, because of our sort of approach, you don't usually get those surprises. I mean, you were physically down looking at the horses today, and they're not even shipped to you. So that's a just something that we take that extra step with. But assuming the ones that come in from, and we've got probably 3 coming in very short order in the next, week or so, as soon as we can get the logistics to go. Those 3, when they come in, how far in the time frame for you will it be before any of those see a breeze that actually gets clocked?
So basically what if everybody comes in and goes through no kind of hiccups, and that means didn't spike a temperature, didn't, kick the wall and its leg blown up, didn't cut itself some way or another, like no hiccups at all. You come in, you probably give them about 2 weeks at the track, 10 to 14 days or so, and then you say, okay, let's work them down the lane and see where they're at. And see, because a lot of times horses can gallop in a straight line, and do things very well, very mannerly, but when they start to go fast, their legs start going every which way, and they're like, okay, I don't know what to do just yet. So the first couple quarters aren't really about going super fast. It's more about doing things correctly, learning to switch leads correctly, and learning to have a horse next to them in company, and doing things like that correctly, and listening to the rider in that aspect. So about the 14th day, we're doing that. And if they do that well, they'll come back the following week and do it. If they don't seem to be exhausted about it, so that puts us at 21 days or so. If they don't seem to be exhausted about that, they would then the following week you would like to try to breeze them 3/8 would be the plan. So it's almost about a month. Mm-hmm. Now, a horse like Wave Jumper was a filly that came into us that's been here. She doesn't have a published work, and that's more so because of the coronavirus situation than anything. She's definitely ready to work 3/8 and stuff like that. So I know what I just described might throw up a red flag to some people that have been following her, but that's just basically due to the situation with the coronavirus and not wanting her to be extremely ready to run and have nowhere to run her kind of situation. So, but that's usually, it usually takes about a month or so before they're ready to breeze a true 3/8.
Well, a great question from Thomas Johnson. What percentage of the horses that come in would you say have some kind of physical issue during training? They, pop a splint, they, have a shin issue. What percentage do you think have that type of issue during that 2-year-old training?
Well, let's just use our horses for example, right? So we had how many 2-year-olds come into us last year? I believe 5, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So we had 5, and we had 2 out of the 5, 2 came up with some injuries. Sevilla Sangria had popped a splint before she came to us at the sale, actually, going into the sale, if you recall, TK. But it wasn't something that set her back. It wasn't a major injury or anything like that. It was just something that, me as a trainer, I had to make sure, just keep an eye on it every day and make sure it wasn't affecting her ability to train or anything like that. And then obviously the other horse was, the Japan filly, New York Geisha, I think, or Wasabi Tsunami was her name. I'm sorry, was the filly. So out of those 5, only 2 came up with some injuries like that, and the other ones kind of went along very nicely and trained very well. I know Beth took Golden Spun Lad and got him right to the races when he won first time out. So he wasn't a horse that came up with any injuries in that aspect. So, it just depends on the batch that you get. And I like to think that the way we do it kind of, the way we've done it, and taking our time, especially with a horse like Wave Jumper, where it's been a homebred horse, got sent to Zoe through our process of doing it in a little bit slower pace than what the sales do, should help with a lot of that. Where at the sales, they kind of gear them up and try to get them to run as fast as they can that first 1/8 of a mile, so they sell well, and that usually makes little injuries like the splints and the buck shins and things like that pop up. So I can't give you an exact percent, but if we were to use ours was 2 out of 5. So.
Yeah, and I think Jesse's point was very spot on. The horses that go to a 2-year-old sale, my experience and the numbers actually play out to this is that the chance that they have an issue is higher. The percentage is just higher, which is another reason why we have slowly moved away from any 2-year-old sales for us and concentrated on getting them as yearlings or home breeding so that we can actually know that we're doing the training the way we want it done and not some forced process to get them to run really fast before they are supposed to. Great question from Andrew Huber, which I actually don't know the answer to, Jesse, so I'm going to be really interested to see what you say. Do you handle the fillies and colts differently to get them to the races?
So in the early stages, no. When we're starting to breeze 3/8 and things like that, when we're getting up that first month that they're at the track, not really. Typically the boys are a little dumber. Which makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you look at
fits right in with the humans, I can tell you that. So it's
humans, exactly.
Yeah.
Usually they're a little they don't pick up things as fast. Most fillies will pick things up very quickly. and say, okay, I got this part figured out. But a lot of times they'll want to move too fast. They'll have a part figured out, and then their minds will say, okay, I'm ready to do something more aggressive, more, I'm ready to work faster. When me as a trainer or other people as trainers probably don't want them to do that as fast just yet. Typically, as we get closer to the races, and get closer to doing a lot more gate work, and they're breaking from the gate, and the fillies get really ready to run, they get kind of really hyper, and not hyper, but they get really very sharp and on their toes. And at that point, you have to slow those fillies down a lot, because they're a little bit more tricky, because when they start not wanting to listen to you, a boy you can kind of be a little bit more aggressive with and kind of like tell them what to do, where the fillies you have to ask them what to do, if that makes sense. And at that point is when you have to like kind of slow them down compared to the boys a little bit. But in the early stages, I think the fillies usually pick things up a lot quicker, and you don't really have to handle them much differently.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Gotcha. That's a great answer. Actually, I wasn't positive of that answer myself. Laura has a really also good question. We get even in our model, when we ship a horse in from Middleburg, how long does it take from the time on them at the training center to the time at Pimlico for them to get used to the new barn setup? What's an average time period before they're generally not skittish or they're just comfortable in the new environment?
Each horse is different. Some horses really, come into a new place and really kind of just own it. Some horses are a little more confident in themselves and trust people and other, right away and things like that, where other ones are just, kind of take their time and smell things and look around. And usually, like I said, this is what that whole first month of all of that is really for, is just them settling into all of that. By then, usually they're all really settled into things like that. The big issue that Zoe has to help horses like that I don't have at Middleburg or Pimlico is Zoe can a nervous horse like that, Zoe can turn them out in a brown pen or in a paddock, the small paddocks they have in Middleburg. And what that does is allows that horse to burn off a lot of that nervous energy. Where at Pimlico and at the racetrack, we don't have that. So that's why it might take a little longer for them to get settled into a new place, like being at the track. Because they're kind of in the stall a little longer than what they would be if they were at a training center. And it's hard for them to kind of just go and get all that anxiety out and kind of, just be a horse for a minute. But like I said, usually around that first 21 days to 30 days, the horses have really settled into the new routine and kind of started picking things up and relaxing around everybody.
Yeah, I think the key thing that Jesse mentioned there, and I know some of you have heard me say it a million times, is that know that these are all individual creatures. Just like if you were coaching a high school football team, which I did for many years, you don't think that all the players are exactly the same. And they're individuals, and they have their own things that motivate them and that they're scared of, and so you just got to learn to sort of figure those things out. So some really other great questions coming in. This one, Jesse, and I know the answer to it, but I think it'll be interesting for you. How much do you look at pedigree to guide your training, especially in those early days?
So, and for me, TK, I don't look at pedigree as much as most trainers. I think I look at each horse individually. I look at the horse that's in front of me and that's under me when I'm riding them, and that I'm watching every day. But in the early days, the big thing in the early days is just making sure they're fit enough to do what I'm asking them to do. If the horse is ready to breeze a 3/8 of a mile, in my mind, it should almost be really ready to breeze 3.5 furlongs, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really start coming into play towards the working 5/8 and breezing from the gate and things like that, because then that's when I got to start saying, okay, TK, this horse isn't, by Drosselmeyer out of, under Fleet Alex mare. So this horse, should be ready to run a 1.5 mile kind of situation, you know what I mean, breed-wise. So it doesn't have a lot of speed. So we need to do some more long-distance breezes and things like that and be more prepared to run this horse 7/8 its first start, or, at least at the very earliest 3/4, because it doesn't have a lot of speed. It's not going to be a 4.5 kind of horse. So in the early days, we're just trying to make sure they're fit enough to do what we're asking them to do. And then closer towards the races, when more of the pedigree and their style of running should come into play, as we start getting closer to races.
Mm. Another good question from Christy Craven, and she asked, what are some signs or clues that you look at where a colt needs to get gelded? And a follow-up sort of question to that is, as you look at that, when do you make that decision?
So it's really difficult because every situation is different, where, we're not, even though we do have a stallion at Wasabi, we're not breeding and buying horses that theoretically on paper should go be stallions, right? We're kind of, the horses that we're buying at this point in the Wasabi, journey, on paper shouldn't really go on to be some, grand sire and this and that and big sire in the country. So, but other operations are different. Everything that they breed and buy has a potential of being a multiple grade 1 winner and being the next great sire. So for us, my biggest thing is when a horse is more focused on doing, misbehaving, or more focused on the fillies and mares next to him, and I can't get to the bottom of him because he's not putting in enough effort to be able to train in a proper manner, to listen to me in a proper manner. And in some cases, some colts can be actually dangerous to be around and be so much to handle that, it just makes more sense and easier to geld them and be able to be easier to handle them and get them training forward. Typically, we like to try to do that. We'll, if they're not terribly hard to manage, you want to get them to their first or second race and then say, okay, like let's go ahead and geld this horse or so. But if something, it just depends on how, like you said, how each individual horse is. If they're extremely hard to manage and they're not focusing and not training in a good order, then I'm going to call you and say, hey, TK, like, I can't get this horse to the races right now the way he is. We're going to have to geld him. We're going to have to give him the time to heal up after that and then move forward with him. And I think that will help him. So it just depends on each individual horse. But usually, if we're up to a point where they're breezing from the gate and halfway through the lane, he's reaching over trying to bite another horse or this or that, and not really putting in the effort to work, is when we're like, okay, like we got to do something with this horse to get him to kind of focus up and pay attention here. Now we've all watched horses run and do that and be very successful. Don't get me wrong, but that's more of a rare case than an everyday occurrence, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, and just to give even more info on that is that I can tell you there are trainers, and there have even been trainers that we have in our group that the minute that they get a colt, a 2-year-old colt, the answer is, I am going to geld that one right now. I mean, they won't even start. Yeah. They'll geld the horse immediately. I mean, I can tell you of one trainer in particular who we've worked with. If I ship him a 2-year-old colt right out of an auction or whatever, he will geld that horse the minute it gets to his barn. That's the first thing he tells me to do.
It's actually really funny. I've worked for Mr. Casey, who's the leading breeder in West Virginia and has been forever, and I've never galloped a colt for him. Not once. He breeds, he has 4 stallions to stand on his farm. He has a boatload of mares, and then he is an extremely successful breeder, and I've never galloped a single colt for him. And then I went to New York and worked for Bill Mott, where every one of them are sired by multiple grade 1 winners out of stakes mares, and every single boy I got on was a colt, and his owners would not allow him to geld horses, because each one of his horses pretty much had a potential, like I said, to be a multiple graded stakes winner and possibly a sire. So even when they weren't running well, they wouldn't geld them. So it just depends on what type of operation you're running and things like that. But like I said, I worked for Mr. Casey, who's won, thousands of races, and have never once sat on a horse for him that was a colt at the track. So, yeah.
Yeah. I can tell you, just in our model, we don't have very many colts or geldings floating around at all. We try to sell them. So if
don't remind me.
Jesse hates when I say that, because he always wants one. But the model for us is we keep the girls, we sell the boys, and that we home breed. So that's generally what we do. And so anyway, not to throw that salt in the wound for you, Jesse, or anything, but a question about tieback surgeries, and I know this is going to be another, it'll depend, but is it ever too early when you get a 2-year-old that you decide that you're going to do a tieback surgery?
So for me, throat surgery is something that I grew up being told never works. I grew up in a situation where throat surgeries are usually not super successful. Now, with that being said, as we all know, Trapped in My Mind had a major throat surgery and has come back, seems to run 2 great races off of it and handled it well. Now, I do think she is the exception to it, but at the same time, I do think that the practice of the tiebacks and the procedure and the way the vets do all of the different throat surgeries nowadays has improved so much that it has been more successful. I try not to do surgery on horses' throats. It's not something that I like to do. I think God kind of made them that way. And when you start going in there and changing things, you can never change it back, kind of deal. So it's one of those situations where when we're breezing horses and we hear them making noise and we scope them and we talk with our vets and discuss situations like that, and we keep moving forward with them and to a point where a lot of times you'll hear a horse make noise breezing 3/8 or a half mile, but it'll still work a good half. And then you watch it work, 5/8, and on the gallop out, it doesn't show you much. And as a trainer, you should know. As a trainer, this horse should be able to work 5/8 in a good time, but still be able to gallop out very strong. And when you watch them start pulling themselves up on the gallop outs and things like that, is when you say, okay, this horse is not getting air. It's not getting enough air to be able to go much further than 5/8 of a mile. You start talking with your vets. Maybe you send, the pictures of the scopes off to some other vets and some other clinics and start getting different opinions like that. But I try to get a horse to its first race before we start saying we got to start, cutting into their throat and tying things back and cutting this out of there and things like that. So that's how I try to handle it. At one point I did work for a client not a client, but another trainer who had a client that loved to do throat surgeries. They had one horse that was very successful off of throat surgery, so he wanted to do it to all of them. And I know my boss at the time did not really enjoy doing that. He did not like that at all. So it's just a situation that each horse you have to play by ear and then try to, speak with different vets and get different opinions and watch the horse and see how its airway does affect it.
Yeah. I'll just layer in some other thoughts on the throat surgery piece. The other thing to keep in mind as an owner is to understand that the expense that comes with that. So you have to make a smart decision of, is this a horse that has the potential to earn this money back? Because you depending on which surgery and the level that you're talking about on that tieback, some are not very expensive, some are very expensive depending on the situation. But if you start listening and the number is, it's going to be 3 months off of training, which actually means probably 5 or 6 months till it gets back to a race. And when you talk to the vet or surgeon and they say, there's only a 25% chance it's going to work anyway, then you have to start to make an economic decision of what you want to do with that horse. And so those are also factors that go into it before you make that decision of how you're going to spend that money, and can you make a smart economic decision or not. Jesse, just moving on, let's think about that first race and that a horse is a 2-year-old's going to get to. There are groups of people who say that 2-year-olds should not race at all. And there are people who almost refuse to race 2-year-olds. Where in your thinking does that kind of logic fall? How do you approach that mindset?
So it's the same thing as everything, right? They're all individuals. They're all different sizes. Their bones are all, growing and changing at different rates. I do think that horses racing at Keeneland going 4.5 and 51 probably isn't the best thing for them in April, I guess, or when would the Keeneland meet have already started and they would be running. Wesley Ward would have already won 4 2-year-old races by now if coronavirus wasn't going on. So I do think that's a little bit risky, for the horse's health, because at the end of the day, how many of those horses, where do you see them again after that? Some of them don't even make it to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and they ran great races very fast early as 2-year-olds at Keeneland. So it's one of those things that I think you have to take each horse individually and bring them along at their own rate kind of deal, and try to really just take care of the horse. That's got to be your answer for everything as a horseman or as a trainer. You have to do right by each individual horse. And for people that say that their 2-year-olds shouldn't race, well, there are very precocious 2-year-olds that do come along very well. Their knees, their growth plates, and everything that are healed up, and they move along very nicely, and they do everything right. So I don't think that you can rule out completely just not running 2-year-olds in that aspect. But I definitely think that there is an argument to have with running 2-year-olds very early on and things like that. So that's almost a debate that's a little bit above my pay grade, if that makes sense. I do think that we as an organization in Wasabi, and your and I's opinion and things like that, we look to yes, probably get horses to the races, running in some of those 4-year-old or 4.5 races and things like that. But we're not looking to win first time out. We're kind of just looking to build education on those kind of races more so than we are looking to win and win first time out and have to win first time out or in their first 2 starts and things like that, where we're more so looking to have just a good experience, load them in the gate with 9 or 10 other horses and have them get around there, get some dirt kicked in their face, go through the paddock, things like that, is what we're more looking to do in our operation. But so it just depends on what style of trainer you are, what style of owner you're looking to be, and what the horse you have underneath with you kind of deal. So.
Yep. A question from Lauren. What kind of things do you look at where you think you've got a special horse that came into the barn? And when do you first think you have something special?
Okay, so I'm going to use Trapped in My Mind as an example, because everybody that knows me on Slack or anything like that knows that is most likely my girlfriend. From the time Trap came in the barn, everything I asked her to do, like I said before, most fillies pick it up quickly. Trap picked it up a week before I asked her to do it, in her mind. I had to slow her down a lot of times and get her to do some things. But Trapped in My Mind's first half mile was really special. I had a pretty good season jockey on him at Delaware Park, and I told him, look, if she went in 51 for the half, I'd be happy. It's her first half mile. And she broke off next to necessary drama, and about the quarter pole, she caught up to another horse, an older horse, and basically ran off with the guy and didn't want to lose. And as we've all watched through her races and through, you know, some of her setbacks, she enjoys the competition, enjoys racing. So you look for the horse that truly likes that aspect of it, that likes to beat the horse next to it, that likes to actually just to be a racehorse. You know, that those are what shows me a horse that's going to be special for a long term. A horse that of ours right now that we have, an older horse that when you watch him work, and you put him next to another horse, you see a different animal. Is what Fear the Turtle. You know, he's a kind of horse that immediately you watch him work next to one, and then watch him work by himself, and you see a different horse in front of you. You know, he's very controllable with the rider when he's by himself, but as soon as he gets next to another horse, he's like, okay, my job is to be in front of this horse. And he knows it. And that's how Trapped is. And I think a lot of special horses are like that. They understand very early on what we're asking to do.
So, got a question about progression of works. How, you know, and I've heard a million trainers talk about this with a million different answers, candidly. But Jesse, I'd love to hear your answers to this question of the progression of timed works for a 2-year-old. What progression are you looking at? How many do you want to see published before a first race? How many do you want the horse to experience? How long are some of those? Give some thoughts about, or share some thoughts about the progression of works.
Okay, so like for me as a trainer, you know, say you get a horse, for us, say Zoe has the horse, and we're going to say, okay, it's going to come in May 1st. And the last week in April, Zoe works at a quarter mile. You know, an easy quarter mile there in Middleburg, you know, let's say in the 26 or something like that for a quarter mile, 26 seconds. And it's perfect, you know, just nice and easy through the lane, switches leads well. Now it comes into me. We give it about 21 days, 14, 21 days. We work at another quarter mile or so, 14 days or so. And I would usually do that twice. And obviously those aren't published works. They only publish 3/8 or further. So we do that 2 times. And the idea behind that is I want to see them do it correctly the first time in a nice under control pace and not a super big gallop out. We'll have the riders kind of make them pull up a little bit more because I want to make sure they're fit enough to do what I'm asking them to do. You know, we'll come back the following week. We'll work them another quarter mile. And this time we'll probably drop their head a little bit. Now, I'm not saying the rider's pushing on them and whipping and driving or anything like that, but just giving them their head and seeing if they want to accelerate the last 1/8 of a mile. And then at the wire, we'll let them have a nice gallop out and try to see what they do the 3/8 in on the gallop out. You know, if they do the 3/8 in 39:40 at that point, then I say, okay, you know, next week this horse can come back and actually work a 3/8. So like I said before, if everything goes around, goes along correctly with no hiccups or anything like that, we're going to do that same process each step of the way. We're going to do 2 3/8. The second 3/8 a little quicker and a little bit bigger gallop out. The horse comes back and it should be a little tired that second time, but not exhausted. You know, they're not drinking 2 buckets of water. They're not leg weary. They did it well within themselves. We're going to come back the following week and do another little easy half mile, then another half mile at the same idea, a little bit quicker pace, right? Now, it's very funny. From 3/8 to a half mile doesn't seem very hard for a horse, but from 3/8 or from a half mile to a 5/8 is a big difference. So depending on the horse and how they handled that second half mile, I may come back and do another half mile. But if they did it well within themselves and they're moving along, like I said, with no hiccups and no setbacks, then we'll go ahead and move on to that easy 5/8 and then another 5/8. And then finally, throughout the weeks, we've been building them up at the gate to be prepared to break from the gate. And I try to time it to where when they're ready to do a 5/8, they're also ready to break from the gate. So then we'll go and break them 5/8 from the gate that third time. And then I'll really look to try to start picking out a race at that point. So usually you would do, like I said, 2 3/8, 2 halves, two 5/8 from the pole, and then a nice 5/8, and then what you would like to do, depending on the distance of the race, you might have a little 3/8, but right before the race, maybe 5 days out or so, to kind of just put some more speed into them, because usually those 2-year-old races are a little bit shorter distance kind of races. But so that's usually how it, like I said, if everything worked out perfect, that's how you'd like to do it.
Got a question from Thomas. He asked, you mentioned competitiveness, and Trapped and her competitiveness, Turtle and his competitiveness. Is there anything that you do as a trainer to sort of like get into their head to be competitive? Or are there tricks that you do to see what their competitiveness is going to be? Is there anything you do in training to sort of figure that out?
Yeah, actually, very early on, we start doing things like, so horses are herd animals. So usually with the 2-year-olds, you like to send them in pairs. That way they're used to being around each other. They're used to getting bumped into each other. And that also teaches them that competitiveness, as they're galloping, even though you're having just a normal gallop and it's not a work, that last half mile with that 1.5-mile gallop, when they're next to each other, you kind of start letting them pick it up. You switch in and out, you let one get up in front of each other and make the other one come up around on the outside. And as a rider, I was always taught that's how you teach them that competitiveness. Like when the other one gets up in front of them, as a rider, you kind of give them the cues to like, hey, we got to get up next to this one. We got to get in front of this one. And they start to play and understand that this is what we're asking them to do. And that's how we kind of like teach them that. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some horses that could care less. They're just like, whatever, man. I'm just out here running around, having a good time. And it takes a little while for them to mature and catch up to it. But a lot of times, this is what they're bred to do. They're bred to run around and have fun, and they do enjoy it. But that's how we try to, that's how I've always been taught to teach them that a little bit, and teach them that competitiveness and through their normal everyday gallops, and just having them flop in and out and bump into each other, and having them pick it up. The way I set my gallops up, the last half mile is usually from the half-mile pole to the wire. So as they start picking up that last half mile, at the wire, they're at a really nice, strong gallop, and there's, one horse is in front, one horse, they battle back and forth a little bit, and they learn that that's how, what we're asking them to do. And like I said, it's, some horses just naturally have that, like Trapped and Turtle and things like that. So some horses are a little bit easier to teach and pick it up than others, but that's how I try to do it, and how I was always taught to kind of do it.
So I've gotten 2 questions, and I'm going to actually blend them into one question, and I'm actually going to start the answer to the question. But I've gotten some questions about, talk a little bit about the success rate of 2-year-olds, meaning how many of them actually get to races as a 2-year-old, how many of them get to races as a 3-year-old, how many of them win races. So I don't, and a similar question there that I got from another person was, how long do you let the horse go before you decide that there's just not enough talent there to keep racing it? So I'm going to actually blend those into one answer that's going to be a little long-winded. But the short answer is that the vast majority, this is not going to be a surprise. I believe the percentage is, and these numbers flow up and flow down a little bit all the time, but the actual number is about 1/4 of all the foals that get born actually get to a race. So that means 3/4 don't even get to a race from the time they're born to the time they can get into a race as a thoroughbred, let's say 2.5 years later. So the numbers, a lot of them drop out for all kinds of reasons, health reasons, whatever. They drop out in that timing. I believe the number is only like 1 in 10 ever win a race from the time they're born to the time that they actually, all of their racing career. Okay, so the numbers aren't good, quote unquote good, that the baby that's born now is going to grow up to even be a winner 2, 3, 4 years from now. So that's the percentages. So that's one piece. The second piece, which is around Diane's question of how long do you let the horse go until you say, hey, this ain't gonna make it, or it's not gonna make it for us, which I think is an important piece. Is once again, this becomes an economic decision at some level. Just so everyone understands, keeping a horse in training is about $3,000 a month. That's the number. A little less, little more, but I'm just averaging it for you. It's different in different parts of the country, but I'm averaging it for you. It costs the number I always tell people is, think $3,000 a month is what it takes to keep a horse in training. Okay? So that's an economic decision TK has to make. And in our model, that's an economic decision TK has to make, because TK's footing the bills, because for our horses in training, no one's getting a bill on those except for me. So although all of you don't feel it when the horse eventually ends its career. But what I would tell you is the conversation goes something like this with whomever the trainer is, Jesse or another Jesse, and I've had this exact conversation. Jesse, is this a story of the horse has got to go grow up, or is this a story of a horse that is just always going to be slow? And at that point, I'm looking for an honest assessment from the trainer. And we only work with trainers who are going to give me an honest assessment. So, and so that's what I'm looking for. And we do an economic decision in some cases. Now, in some cases, we get to that point and we say, you know what? This horse probably has some turf. And we might even look at pedigree. This horse might be turfy, and turf season's over for this horse. There's nowhere to run and figure that out if that's going to work. Why don't you put it on the farm for the winter, and we'll bring it back as a 3-year-old. Now, putting a horse on the farm, you could take that $3,000 a month and make that $1,000 a month. So I just saved $2,000 a month, and I get it through the winter, and I have a bigger, mature horse that may work on the turf when we come back. But these are economic decisions to make at some level. But that's what goes into it, really. We've had horses where now, and the other thing to keep in mind is, just because the horse doesn't work for us, that doesn't mean they may not work at a very different track where the purse structure is very different, right? Meaning, so these are all decisions that go into it for sure. I got one last question. I just got a note. We're coming up on that hour, and this has been a great session, by the way. Thanks for doing this, Jesse. Let me close it up with a question for you to think about. What if and I know this is another one where I know the answer, but I think it's great if you share it. Is in your mind as a trainer, what is so appealing about getting 2-year-olds in to be in your barn compared to being a claimer?
I mean, just watching the light bulb go off, getting them from those timid days of, having to baby them around the shed row, letting them smell things, and gaining their trust, and then to lead them into the winter circle for the first time is very rewarding. You enjoy the horse, you enjoy every aspect of the horse, and watching them grow up. It's almost like kind of raising kids, not that I know what that's like, but I do know what I do have 2 nephews that I watched grow up, and now a niece, so it's similar in that aspect. Like, it's just, those first couple of days, like we talked about early in this conversation, those first, 3 or 4 days where they're, you have to, just get them around there and let them see things to where now they're actual racehorses. And that's very rewarding. And like you said, you just mentioned the statistics of ever getting one there, of ever even getting one to the races or to the track. Like that's an accomplishment in itself. And so to be able to do that is very rewarding in itself, and watching them become, reach their potential as best you can help them is very, very rewarding for me. I enjoy that aspect of it. And like I said, it's how I grew up with them, because of growing up in Mr. Casey's barn with the 2-year-olds that I did. I got to be around a lot of nice West Virginia bred horses and things like that each year. And that's what you work towards, is just getting them to those races and getting them to their potential is just a really good feeling.
Super. Well, that's a great place to end it on, Jesse. I think that was a really fitting answer for our last answer. So first of all, thanks for everyone for coming out tonight. Thanks, Jesse, for taking the time and being a part of this. This has been recorded, and we will publish it for anybody that might miss a piece of it or miss the beginning, or you'll see this on YouTube sometime tomorrow. And, thanks everyone for coming tonight, and enjoy your evening.